Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's episode of Star Trek Lost Stars. My name is Tony, and today is, as I promised yesterday, the follow-on of yesterday with the Turn 102 map reveal. But just before I get into that, let me say thank you for joining us live. If you're with us live, and I see a bunch of you in the chat already, thank you for everybody who's catching this on the replay. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're joining us for the very first time and you're thinking to yourself, what on earth are you talking about, Tony? What is Star Trek Lost Stars? It is a 4X turn-based strategy game that we play online using the F&E, or Federation Empire rule set, as published by the Amarillo Design Bureau, and set in the Starfleet universe. So it's a Star Trek game, essentially, based in sort of the TOS, Shatner-era Kirk and Spock, as well as the animated series. And we play it online here with you on using a platform called Vassal to be able to see the map, which you'll see in a second. And we share it here on YouTube, Twitch, and Facebook to for you guys to watch and kind of carry on with the interesting storytelling, the evolving events, and sort of the fun that we're having with the game. If that's something that interests you, in the sense of you like turn-based strategy games, turn-based or Star Trek just in general, then please feel free to head over to our Facebook page, which is in the chat right now. Click that link, head over there, and you can message me, connect with us there. And of course, if you're interested in seeing more of this kind of content, well, please feel free to hit that subscribe button. Follow us on whatever platform you're on, and just keep on track with all the latest updates as we keep rolling them out. On that note, actually, I just wanted to quickly say thank you and praise to our community. Yesterday in our live stream, I mentioned the fact that between now and the end of the year, we're going to be kind of pushing more about growing the channel, growing the audience, so to speak. Because again, our mission here is about building a player base of folks who enjoy playing this kind of game and have fun doing it. And in order to be able to sort of get that word out to reach the greatest amount of people and sort of build that group, that community of players, we need to be able to grow the channel, not for any vain metrics, but just to be able to get the YouTube algorithm behind us and sort of spread the word. And in that vein, I noticed a particular spike in subscribers between just yesterday and today. It's relatively small, but it's big in the big picture. So, for example, as of yesterday, we had 46 subscribers. When I logged on this morning, we now have 50. That's a growth of 4. And to put that in context, when you have 46, that's just shy of 10% growth in 24 hours. So that's really significant. And I just want to thank you all who have, graced us with your subscription. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward to hearing from you in the comments, understanding better what you want to see in these kind of shows. And with all that said, Tony, shut up and just get to the map, because that's what this is all about. The map reveal. Let's just get to it. And why are my buttons not working? Here we are. There we go. All right, ladies and gentlemen, here we are. This is the Turn 102 map reveal. As always, with these maps, we're starting up in the top left corner with Big Red, our Tholian friends. And you can see here a couple of key notes as we sort of peruse the map, just generally looking at a couple things. We can see that there is a sort of a new planet that's been discovered over here in the top left. Looks like it is a major, which is big because that's a potential 5 EP point of income for the Tholians. You can also see that this wormhole has a couple of folks have come through, a research and development team, a diplomat, and an escort frigate. Excuse me, that interesting little development. We'll talk about that in a little bit. As we scroll over here, we can see that there is a diplomat en route to us from the Tholians. Previously, there was no diplomat. That it had been used. We had a diplomat at one point. Then they asked to take it back for sort of incorporating all the other planets. And now there's a diplomat coming back to our homeworld. So that's great. More diplomatic exchange. It's good. Just, further builds that relationship, so to speak. As you can see, there seems to be a lack of bugs in this particular area. Also a lack of star bases, which obviously ties in. You can see that the fleet that's here looks quite banged up, and we'll go over that in a moment. Whoa, who are these guys? Let me move my head so you can really get a good look at what I'm looking at. What is this white and yellow on the map? Oh my goodness. We'll go over them in a second, but just to give you a quick look, the Space Tigers are in white. Those are the Kzinti, and the ISC in yellow. ISC is just a faction within the Starfleet universe. Think of them as like a really pushy NATO. It's probably a good way to think about it, or UN. They're like the Federation of Planets, only they've got a far more militaristic, pacifist agenda, at least in traditional Starfleet universe kind of stuff. All right, as we go down the line here, we can see, oh, look, there's our good friends, the Juggernauts. They are continuing their southeasterly track towards the Federation border. Good times. And as was discussed yesterday, we've got some banged up ships in the vicinity. You can also see that there is a planet killer, the Doomsday device. Well, that's just the picture for the monster, but it is a monster in Federation space. Very interesting to see. Just kind of popped up there. As we further go down, we can see some further exploration or like pushing into the gray zone. We can see, oh, look, the Tholians are moving their diplomat towards the Borak homeworld. That makes sense. What else we got here? As we scroll up, we can see the Paravian space. I can't really see anything of note other than, you know, a couple of ships on the border here. And then, of course, our Romulan friends. We can see a convoy, exploration freighter, and a YSN. Interesting to note, though, that they're sort of outside the sensor range of the stuff that's in the vicinity. So I'm not sure where that sort of quote-unquote data is coming from, whether that's a kind of like a sensor echo, so to speak, which can happen. You can see on your map the last known reported position of a thing, a unit or whatever, and you might be able to track it if you know what it is. Kind of like if you know the signature of something, you can continue to monitor it as it goes away from you. But when it's outside of your sensor range, which is 2 hexes for anything with special sensors, you'll lose track of it. So it'll be interesting just to sort that out. Let's do our round the bases real quick. Okay, can't talk. You couldn't see the Romulans, of course, because my head's on the wrong side. Let me flip that around. Just as a recap there, Romulans in the corner over here. You can see the YFES, which is that exploration freighter small. The Snipe, or the YSN. Snipe, it's a frigate for the Romulans, and a Y convoy. Now, let's talk about the money. It's all about the money, honey. And here we go. So in no particular order, just going from the top of the list to the bottom, we can see the Borak now at 118 ships. That is a pretty significant sort of increase. Yeah, that's a really significant increase from previous turns. And I'm not sure whether that indicates like a desire, a push from them to be more militarized. I'd have to go back and just check yesterday's live stream as to the number of ships that they had. But that's a big, like, they're obviously growing their fleet count significantly. And I think it's funny, the ship count relative to us, but I'll get to that in a second. Now, despite the 118, they still only have 275 attack factors, 545 defense with a 544 fleet cap. Very interesting. That's quite significant. Keeping in mind, of course, that this Borak fleet cap, unfortunately, also continues to track the minor factions that are Borak. So there might be a little sort of cross-contamination there when it comes to the calculations, because obviously Vassal, not a smart enough platform to be able to, and we don't have coding to be able to differentiate between the vassal states and the player states. And so if you see ISC or Romulan or any other faction on the board, the vassal platform just calculates all of those units from that particular team, so to speak. And it doesn't make a distinction between the Borak satrapy in the Paravian space and the Batman faction played by the current Game Master. But let's go down the list, and we can see here that the Federation is currently at 153 ships, Whew, keep building it, baby. They are getting big and big and big with a 547 in their attack factors, 717 fleet cap. They're just big, crazy. We're going to include the ISC now because, of course, Big Yellow is on the screen. You can see that they have a total of 33 ships, 110. Hilarious. They have, this is priceless. They have 33 ships. Almost, not quite, a quarter of the Borak fleet size. And they have 110 attack factor. Their ships have, not quite, but we'll call it a little more than a third, a little less than half of the attack potential of the Borak fleet, and they have a quarter of the fleet size. Crazy. Crazy. Very interesting, though. So they have a total fleet cap 158, and again, 33 ships. The Klingons, well, that's us, and we've kind of tumbled a bit. Our fleet count is now 115, and that's because last turn, well, we got curbed basically by the Juggernauts and suffered some losses. So that's why that's the way that is. We're still floating at 419 for total attack factors, 433 for defense, and our fleet cap is at 459. The Kzinti. Now, this is a perfect example of how the fleet cap is skewed, because we know that we have a Kzinti faction at the top of the map here, which is sort of where those my diplomats are, and there's a minor faction there that's Kzinti. So we know that they're there, and they have a relatively large fleet. That does not include the Kzinti that are over on the side of the map that we just discovered. So when you see this number of 81 ships, it's kind of, it's very much misleading. Just seeing if we can maybe eliminate the fleet just by little math here. So in India 20, what's the name of the fleet, I wonder? Kzinti Home Patrol, Patriox Fleet. I'm just seeing if there's a way, looking at the numbers here, if I can somehow like pull out the fleet count from India 20. I can't see it off the top of my head here as I'm looking. Oh, look, there we go. So minor empires have 33 ships and 103 attack, 136 defense. So those 33 ships that we can take away from the fleet count of the Kzinti. So if we take away 33 ships from 81, that puts us at 42. Sorry, not 42, 48. I believe that's 48. So 48 ships to the ISC 33, and they have about a similar attack factor. I think it was 103 was their attack factor. So 103 puts us at 115. So 115. So they're very similar to the ISC in that respect. So very close in size. The Lyrans are on the board here, but we don't see the Lyrans on the map right now. We have Orions, again, just minor faction. Praevians, they are at 94 ships. They're continuing to grow their fleet, although that's not a significant increase from their last turn. And they have a 350 attack, 437 defense, with 453 total fleet cap. So basically, that puts them, from a fleet cap perspective, in the same ballpark as we were talking about before in yesterday's turn. It's all sort of around the 450 mark when it comes to fleet cap. So comparable fleet size to the Klingons. I mean, really, 20 ships isn't that too much of a difference. And but of course, there's a big delta between the attack factor and defense factor. We have the Romulans, but like I say, we don't see them all. And the Tholians. Tholians at 121 ships, so no fleet increase from last turn. That's pretty much it. So Tholians are 121. We're at 115. So we're close, but their fleet cap is higher than ours. So their total sort of like durability of their ships is bigger, or better, I should say. But again, the delta between the attack factors is significant. All right. So that was EP and fleet. Oh, sorry, we haven't done EP yet. Let's do EP. So EP. Let's see. Let's just go from the top and go to the bottom. So Borak are at 71 EP. 71 EP. I'm thinking that puts them at the top of the heap. Yes, it does. So at the top, The king of the castle is now the Borak at 71 EP. The Federation, again, still at 67.5. The ISC, of course, our new faction, they are at 17, which is a very respectable number considering their size and how many turns they've been involved. But we'll dive into their sort of space in a second here. Klingons are holding steady at 70. The Kzinti, 18. Now, I'm not sure if that 18 includes India 20. Let's see here. Planet resource. No? Okay. So that 18 is totally the Kzinti Empire. It does not include the minor faction in any way because the planet isn't specifically designated Kzinti within Vassal. So the calculation will be completely their empire. So 18 to 17 basically is those two empires, which is good. The Paravians are at 58.5, so that's a 1 point increase from their last turn. And the Tholians holding steady at 70.5. So again, as we were talking about before, we've got sort of the three empires that are floating around 70, 71, 70.5, 70. We have the Federation just below that at 67.5. A big delta between them and the Paravians at 58.5, and then, of course, the minor factions below that. But they're all floating around the same at 17 and 18, respectively. But boom! So that's big. All right. So now let's do a quick little analysis, and I'll flip my... actually, I'll leave my head on this side for the Tholian assessment. So, a couple key things I want to point out here. The first is this friendliness with the Borak. So I was hoping, I mean, not that I want everybody to start fighting at all, but I was really hoping that the Borak and the Tholians would kind of rough it up a bit and then they would start fighting. And I don't understand. I mean, whatever. I mean, they'll play however they're going to play. I don't know what the role playing is back and forth between them, but because I don't have that visibility. But man, it would just be nice to see those two players go at it, because for the 5 iterations of the game so far that we've played, there's been this constant narrative about how these two players, really want to go at each other. And they have not had the opportunity because of the dispersion or the like where everyone's been placed on the map. They just haven't been neighbors. And because of that, there was one game where they were, and they didn't fight each other. It was funny. And here's another occasion when they have the ability to sort of start a fight with one another, and they're not. So I wonder if perhaps I'm being sold a lie, so to speak, in the sense that I have heard from our community of players, the players that are currently playing this game, that these two guys want to go at each other all the time. They've been looking for opportunities to test themselves against each other. There have been, at this point, in 5 iterations of this game, multiple opportunities for that. The last game was the only time when we actually went to war, or those two guys went to war, and I was with the player who's playing the Tholians. Him and I were ganged up against the game master. Yeah, I was looking for like a straight-on tete-a-tete between these two, and obviously that's not going to happen. So what do I see? I see, obviously, an exchange of R&D and diplomats. Now, does that mean they won't go to war? Not necessarily, but, I mean, basically, they're starting off in a very friendly way. C'est dommage. Also, and this is a particularly interesting development. So the Paravians and the Klingons, obviously we've had some temperamental engagements in relatively recent history. And you can see here that on this particular, here I'll switch my head so it's a little easier to see. You can see here that there is this YDK, so it's a YDoc, and it is a Paravian space station currently only being defended by Tholian units. The Tholian fleet that's defending it is not insignificant, but not like threatening. A 1 cruiser, destroyer, a bunch of these patrol craft, which they're not terrible, but they're not great, and a scout. So I don't understand what's going on there. I mean, if it's for trade, which was the initial sort of narrative around why they were defending that location because they wanted to maintain their trade with the Paravians, then what's this bunch of guys doing down here on this planet? Now, are they somehow a remnant of another support fleet that's heading back to Tholian space? Maybe. We'll see. But it's interesting to note, like, I guess the question from my perspective as the Klingons is, are the Tholians and the Paravians developing some kind of sort of closer relationship whereby Tholians are going to just start operating in Paravian space and defending Paravian assets? Because that seems weird to me. Yeah, kind of strange. But, I mean, like I said, the Tholians have been a great neighbor to us as Klingons, and it's all worked out really well. Let's take a quick look at the Klingon space. You can see here that, like I said, the big void. I've had 3 bases? 2 bases. 2 bases destroyed by the swarm. One was in Gulf 10, one was in Foxtrot 11, and then a number of ships. The fleet that went to destroy them did so, I mean, I think I crippled 16 of my frigates in destroying that swarm, but destroy them we did. So those ships are there. That's unfortunate, but we're going to have to get the sort of the other ships out there to start building bases and reinforcing that area. What's a particular interesting note here as well is when you look at, not that we're going to start a fight with the Tholians, but just to look at it from a threat assessment perspective, with all the gray hexes here, there is a very tight bottleneck that the Tholians would come through if they were going to attack us. Before, there had been a wormhole in this hex right here, which is why there's a Y-dock there, because I had built that as a sort of a doorstop for that wormhole. But, yes, I mean, this is kind of a little bit of a funnel that the Tholians would have to go through. And if you notice, over the time that we've encountered each other, the Tholians and the Klingons, we've maintained a lot of grayed out area because it kind of prevents us from having points of contention or like points of conflict. So it's very interesting how that's sort of like that dynamic has evolved during the game. Something to think about when the next campaign starts is sort of how do you manage the exploration of or the opening up of hexes between you and your neighbor. So anyways, interesting to think about. However, let's get into our good friends now, the Kzinti and the ISC. So the first thing you might get alarmed about, which, you know, if I was looking at this map, I'd be like, whoa, 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 what's going on here? Is this giant yellow line of hexes going into Klingon space. So let's not get too excited about that. That is obviously a border neutral zone agreement that was made between the Kzinti and the ISC when they encountered each other. And they just extended that line up to a certain hex, not knowing where we were. And so now we've engaged with them. So now we have this interesting dynamic between the Kzinti, the ISC, and the Klingons. So how we're going to evolve that relationship going forward? Are we going to set up, the traditional way would be to set up a neutral zone or like borders between us. We'd negotiate what that looks like. And then, of course, this sort of yellow hex scenario would change. And then we can figure out where our borders will or won't be. You know, how that's going to evolve, I'll let that sort of story element hang in suspense at this point because obviously I don't know what it's going to look like. We're going to evolve that through the role play. Excuse me. So, but it'll be interesting to see how that goes. Interesting to note though that the Kzinti homeworld right here is literally right next to another major planet. So that's going to be interesting. When that major planet incorporates itself, assuming it will, because it's a happy plus, if it incorporates itself into the Kzinti, that'll be an extra 5 EP. So if they're at 18 now, you know, 23 EP, that's pretty good for that size of an empire, considering how much of a footprint they have. The ISC, as you can see here, no planets really that I can see. Let's just remove the ships. Yeah, no planets, just assets. And then, of course, they got their home system here. Interesting to note how close they are to the wormhole and sort of like where they were relative to us and knowing where they were. So very interesting to note. As we go down, as I said, there is two things here. Let's just quickly address the monster in the room. And so the only thing I would advise and I'll have to engage the feds on this, is the monster. So there's a monster here, and how this works in the game. Let me just switch out here so that you're not staring at the map necessarily. So how monsters work in the game, and I learned this the hard way. So a monster will appear, and there'll be a counter on the map, and don't pay too much attention to the monster. Or rather, don't pay too much attention to the icon or the counter that's there. It's a general sort of like descriptor of what that thing is. And then you will send ships to interrogate or investigate or figure out what's going on there. There's a two-step process. The first step is to identify the monster. And think of it like exploring a fog of war hex. It's like a survey ship comes in and explores the hex and figures out what you're dealing with. Or like a classic Star Trek episode, the ship shows up and does like a sensor scan and is trying to assess what's going on here. And actually the Doomsday episode of Star Trek TOS is a good example of this in the sense that they have no idea what they're dealing with. They come across a crippled ship and they're trying to figure out what can possibly hurt this Doomsday device. So you show up, you investigate what's going on with the monster, and then you can sort of understand it's sort of like a tactical assessment of what it can do, and then you can attack it if you want to. Normally you do. However, there's a number of different sort of weapons, if you want to think of it this way, that a monster can have. It can have a kind of weapon that can attack or inflict damage on ships one at a time, sort of like conventional combat in fleet combat, which is you have a pool of damage that you create, and then the defender disperses that damage across the fleet. But as I encountered once, and this was earlier in another iteration in this game, I sent a fleet at the time early in the game. So I sent a fleet of like 6 ships or something along those lines to investigate this monster and like stomp it because I was worried that it was going to cause issues. The monster had a capability to cause damage to my ships, but in a broad spectrum. So whereas, for example, a Mauler, which we talked about before in the context of the Juggernauts, can do concentrated damage on a single target, this is the opposite. This is broad damage to the entire fleet at the same time. Doesn't matter your formation bonus or anything, the damage is equally distributed. Why was that significant? Because in the first round of the combat, and I didn't know how strong this monster was, it crippled all my ships. In the second round, it destroyed all my ships. And so I was toast. I essentially lost. I didn't lose all the ships. I think I had like a number of frigates and I had a cruiser. And after the frigates were all destroyed, the cruiser retreated, and it was able to survive the 2-round battle because it had a more robust defense factor. But the frigates all died, and it was a lesson learned. So what is the lesson learned? Before you identify the monster, do not send your entire fleet to attack it at one time. Send one ship, or send the fleet and send one ship into a battle round to identify the monster. Once the monster is identified and you can assess what it can do, then at that point, if it's not going to wipe out your fleet, you send the rest of the fleet in and destroy it or attack it or do whatever you're going to do to it. But the key there is that it's a sort of a 2-step process with monsters. First step is to identify what it can do, how dangerous it is, and then the second is to mount the response. If you just jump into it all guns a-blazing, then you may regret that decision, as I did in a previous game, and depending on how much you throw at it, it can be a really critical and crippling decision. So, with that said, as you can see here, we've got the monster here. There are 2 fleets from the Federation that can potentially respond. Obviously, whatever he's going to build this turn 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So even if it moved away and sort of attacked one of these bases, which dollars to donuts, one of these bases is going to die, then the home fleet will be able to reach it on his initiative. Also, third fleet, or sorry, home fleet and whatever he builds here will be able to reach it. Also, third fleet can go out and touch it and probably and can retro back. So these two fleets can attack and reach this monster. They also are coming from supply points, as in a planet and the home system, which means that they can retrograde back to those points. Why is that important? Because the Praevian Strike Fleet is still sitting there, and you know, from the Federation standpoint, he doesn't want to leave this wormhole totally undefended, since the Praevians have initiative on him. He wants to make sure that he leaves something there to defend it. So you could attack, revert, or retrograde the fleet back there, and from the Praevian perspective, they won't see anything move. They won't know what fleets engage this monster unless they investigate the fleet and see how many ships are there or are not there. So, like I say, you could theoretically send the entire third and home fleet to go engage this monster, send all the cripples back to the home world for repair, send all the non-crippled ships back to this planet to doorstop this gravity well. So that's a potential option. Now, here's where it matters for me. You can see that the Juggernaut fleet is continuing to move on. Now, I don't get to see, and let's just confirm this, minor fleets, Juggernaut fleet. Yeah, I don't get to see what's in the Juggernaut fleet. Nothing. And so that's very frustrating because I want to be able to see that. I want to be able to see how crippled they are. Are they still crippled? And so on. Like, is there any ability that they have to self-repair? I have no idea. There had been some sort of like discussion about that. Either way, this fleet is in this hex and will move one hex next turn. Will it move south towards the Federation, as was sort of implied in the communication, which I read to you in the last live stream yesterday? Or will they continue to the Federation, or will they start and deviate to start popping bases on my side, which would suck if that was the case. As a point of it, like as an example, so first Imperial War Squadron, that had 15 frigates in it. It now only has a dreadnought and a cruiser, which is right here. The remaining surviving E4Ms are here and here. They will not be able to respond to whatever this fleet does. This fleet moves here. The crippled ships cannot react. So the only ships that could respond are the E2 and the T4, which are not going to make or break anything in a fight there. In fact, it would be most advantageous if those ships just didn't, well, I mean, they could react in, but they're not going to make any difference to the combat because the Juggernauts are so powerful. So I will have to reach out to the Federation and see if there's something we can do to work together to take out this fleet, because regardless of whether they target me first or go after the feds, they're eventually going to go after the feds, and they're going to cause some kind of significant damage to them one way or the other. So that's a little pain in the posterior. As we go down here, we can see that obviously the wormhole's in full effect in stereo sound, two-way transit. You can see the Tholians are sending a diplomat heading to the homeworld. It looks as if the Borak have initiated a commercial convoy. You can see that here, and it's heading down this way. So the commercial convoy will go through the wormhole, and what's on the other side? Oh, look, there's a Y dock right there. So they'll start going back and forth that way with trade. And that's pretty much it. You can see there is a commercial convoy from the Praevians. It's heading sort of down to probably this YDK here. And it would seem that the Borak are doing a very good job in building out their base infrastructure along the border with the Praevians, whereas the Praevians are negligent on theirs. Now, who am I to say that? Because, I mean, my base structure, or my base infrastructure, is kind of looking a little shoddy as well, especially up here, but that's due to monsters. And And of course, the Paravians have had this thing going on, this war with the Federation that's kind of shifted their priorities. So we'll see how that goes. And then lastly, let's just look. Let's do a quick look here, so we can see that the major fleets from the Paravians, both Vulture and Home. Let's see here, Paravian. So we have Vulture fleet and Home fleet. So we can see that these are the two major fleets that are currently on the home world. So the Home fleet, which was sort of their big fleet from before, is basically the same as it was before. A bunch of Y ships with a CA. You can see that a bunch of their Y ships got crippled in whatever kind of encounter they had, and so they're just moving that and their Y era destroyers back to their homeworld, and they're going to repair that. Shrike fleet is really where the money is as far as oh my goodness. So Shrike fleet has still a total of 7 cruisers in that fleet. They have 19 destroyers and 12 frigates. This is a very dangerous fleet. Like, whatever you want to say, that fleet, when it goes through, if it goes through that wormhole, is going to cause all sorts of headaches for somebody. That being said, if it doesn't stay there and it moves, it's going to be a headache for anyone else who's going to deal with that fleet. I think that the Paravians are going to leave this fleet here because it is a strategic location. One, because the threat that these battle fleets represent from the Federation, which let me just illustrate what those battle fleets are. So we got Battle Fleet 1 and 2, Battle Fleet 1, Battle Fleet 2, and let's just put those here. And I'll put that there like that. And what was it? Second Fleet. So Second Fleet. So this is the fleet of ships arrayed against the Paravian border. Well, that's 14 frigates in Battle Fleet 1. It's 9 in Battle Fleet, or in Second Fleet, I should say. And then another 9 in the Second Battle Fleet. You've got a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, cruisers on the border. Along with a number of 12 other light cruisers and a number of scouts, and of course, these wonderful little Corvette things that are there as well. So long story short, even if it was a tete-a-tete battle between the Paravians and the Feds still come out on top there. They have more ships in the vicinity and generally speaking have more sort of punch to make. Also, a really big thing to note, not that the Feds and the Paravians are going to fight anymore in, like, right now, they have 2 YDKs right on the border, which allow them to do repair, which is the really big thing. The Paravians do not. Yes, they have a battle station here, or a base station there and a base station there that are like 10-9s, but they don't have any significant repairability. And at the end of the day, it's a war of attrition. As you encounter or you have these fights and your ships retreat, can you repair those ships and put them back into the fight quickly? That is an advantage that the Klingons have, generally speaking, as far as the cost to do that. In this case, the Federation has the capacity to do that, and that's where their big advantage is over the Paravians. If the Paravians are looking to equal that out, they're going to have to build out their YDK sort of infrastructure along this area in order to sort of equal the playing field in that regard. And I think that's pretty much it. Let me take a second. I'm going to take a second and go to the comments here. Let's take a quick look. So we got Jim. Good evening. Oh, that was pre-screen here. So what we got? So Jim's offering fried gack to anyone who will have it. Chuck's saying good afternoon. Daniel's very excited about the map. ISC, these people are all too violent. In the name of peace, we should attack them. That's very much the ISC motto. Peace through strength, so to speak. And Chuck says, stop your war or we will be forced to beat you about the head and shoulders with a large blunt object. Very much Teddy Roosevelt of them. Speak softly and carry a big stick. In the case of the ISC and traditional sort of FNE, they very much were were that. They walk around and say, stop fighting, and they beat you until you stop fighting. One other thing that I forgot to address on the map, and let me just quickly go to it, was the monster that I talked about in the last live stream, the new monster that popped up. You can see here, It's identified as Jug, and it has a surprisingly interesting shape that is very similar to the Juggernaut shape for ships that you will see. Let's see here. So minor, Juggernaut. So you'll see here the shape of these ships is very similar to the monster. So the question is, like, what's going on here? In other versions of the game or other iterations that we've played, the Juggernauts have been the equivalent of a monster. They've been a sort of a mysterious tech ship that shows up and causes damage. So that's why this counter's here. Is this counter really another Juggernaut ship? No, because if it was a Juggernaut ship, it would be one of the fleets. Or maybe it's some kind of errant pirate ship. I have no idea. But we'll find out. I'll send ships to investigate, figure out qu'est-ce qu'arrive avec, you know, what's going on with this silly ship. Pardon my French as I start slipping in there. And figuring out what's going on with this thing. What kind of monster is it? Is it really like a high-tech alien ship? If so, when I destroy it, it'll be interesting to see what kind of tech benefit I get from it or anything like that. Oh, and speaking of which, one of the things that I had mentioned before is when you defeat these monsters, there is a kind of like a perk you get from it. So let me give you an example of what that looks like. And I'm not going to show you my my turn sheet here because there's a little bit too much sensitive data on there for my my fellow players. But so if I destroy a monster or an enemy, which I did, for example, in Foxtrot 11 with the Swarm, you get a perk. In this case, I got 5 research points towards warp or hot for defeating the Banshees. Now, what does that mean? When you look at the tech tree, and in this game we have, like in a lot of turn-based strategy games, you have a tech tree that allows you to progress in technology and get certain capabilities. It's not inherent in F&E. It's not in the core rule set, but it's implied in the different eras of ships that have been published through SFB and F&E. Because there are, like I say, there's the W, the Y, the M, and the GW eras. These are all sort of time frames that have been mapped out in the core rule set and the mythology around the Starfleet universe. So extrapolating off of that, the team that sort of built out this game set has built out the tech tree, and it's fairly logical. One of those techs is warp. What does that mean? Just to put it into context, what that technology unlocks for you is war hulls. And war hulls are generally speaking, a GW era tech that allows you to build basically stripped down versions of ships for war. Instead of, if you want to think about this from the context of, for any of you who watched DS9, and you remember seeing in the final seasons of DS9, they had the big sort of fleet battles between the Federation and the Dominion and all that. And you saw these Galaxy-class cruisers that would just kind of flood into these fleet battles. What they did in mythology, what happened with those ships is that when they built them, they didn't build out the full Galaxy-class ship, because the full Galaxy-class ship, if you remember from TNG, had like quarters and rooms for like families and schools. Like, it was designed to be like a deep space exploration ship, as well as a battleship and all those other things. The war hull is a stripped down version of it. So it's basically, it's the chassis with all the bare bones in it, none of the luxury features, and the weapons that make it go. So if you want to think about it from your car, instead of buying a car and getting leather seats and the best stereo and, you know, heated steering wheel and all the bells and whistles that come with your vehicle, you got a bare bones kind of racing metal seat with a couple of, like a bucket seat with a couple of straps, no air conditioning, no radio. You got a stick shift and a steering wheel, and you can go. That's basically it. So that's what these war hulls are. They're cheaper to build, faster to produce, but they provide you the same sort of offensive firepower as those kinds of ships. As an example, as I sort of like go through we call it the MSIT. It's basically the shopping list. We'll call it the shopping list of ships that you can possibly build. So let me look through here and see if I can find a comparable war hull. I'm trying to find a war hull. Typically, war hulls are here we go. So like the new heavy cruiser, the new this then that. So for example, if you look at from a GW era, a D6 is a heavy cruiser, right? D6, D7. A D6, a conventional D6, when you build it in the M or GW era, is a 7-8 ship, right? It costs you about 8 to build. A war cruiser, which is a D5, is is a 7 attack, but it only costs you 5 to build. So it's cheaper to build. It gives you a roughly around the same attack factor. Well, it gives you the same attack factor, close to the same defense factor. But that's the sort of balance here. You get a cheaper to build ship, close to the same amount of attack and defense factors, and it just allows you to sort of put more out there, if that makes sense. Let's see here. The USS Defiant was clearly a war hull, very much so, but also an experimental ship in the sense of like the cloaking device and all that. And Chuck says Constitution class versus Miranda class in Star Trek 2. Yeah, so the Miranda class was supposed to be I believe it was a new heavy cruiser versus the Enterprise class. And I get into debates with folks about whether the Enterprise in the movies was a Constitution class just upgraded or whether it was its own class of ship. I've seen a number of different, and this is sort of going back to the FASA stuff, I've seen a number of things that indicate that the movie era ship was such a significant upgrade that it was its own designation of ship, like it was its own class. So whereas you had a Constitution and various upgrades for the Constitution class, the Enterprise and the Enterprise A was its own designation of ship because so much had been improved on it. If you want to think of it like the Mirandas, like the Reliant, there were all these different Miranda variants that were their own classes of ship that you saw in like TNG. And basically that was just kit bashing. You know, like they had a Miranda model, and so they just stuck a bunch of other stuff on it to make it look different. And that was how they validated that, right? It was just a Miranda class with some other bells and whistles stuck onto it to make it a new hull. And so that's what you saw, as opposed to an upgraded version of that ship, which just maybe it had more power or a slightly different weapon outfit. But generally speaking, the basic fundamentals of the ship and the chassis were the same. Whereas the model design upgrade between the Constitution class of the TOS TV series and the movies in Star Trek 1, for example, that was such a substantial shift in size, in design. I mean, the saucer section, the secondary hull, obviously the warp nacelles and the stanchions, everything changed in that regard. They introduced a photon torpedo launcher in the neck of the between the secondary hull and the saucer section, versus in the original Constitution class, it was, depending on your interpretation of the model, it was either at the very front of the saucer section or it was sort of right underneath, where you would see that lit up area at the bottom of the saucer, which was, I guess, supposedly where the transporter signal would have been transmitted or whatever. So depending on your interpretation of the hull and how it was sort of depicted, it was either from the front of the saucer section or in that sort of undercarriage area underneath the saucer. Regardless, they obviously shifted the location of it in the movie design. So, the refits were called Enterprise, Constitution class versus Miranda. So Chuck seems to be on the same page as me. So, with that said, where are we at here? So, all right. So I see that we're recording. Normally on my software here, it shows me how long we've been recording. I can't quite keep track. Obviously, looking at the clock, it looks like we're about 50 minutes in here. A little bit longer than I thought. So 2 questions for you right now. One, how was this map revealed for you? Did it give you any more information? Was it something that you would like to see in the future, in the sense of if we do a live stream on the Saturday and you don't see the term for whatever reason didn't come out at the time of the live stream, would you prefer or would you like a follow-up live stream like this on the next day with the turn reveal, assuming I get that turn in that time? There are all sorts of reasons why I might not. Because after all, this is a game that we're playing with people, and people have various constraints, and real life gets in the way, and all sorts of things can impede our ability to kind of move forward in that regard. So would it be of use to you to see these turn reveals in this way? Second, what other kind of content would you like to see? So, for example, you will look, if you check out the channel, you'll see that there was the sort of the Klingon introductory, or the first video that was posted on this channel, which was more of a montage of different cutscenes and various things talking about the history of the Klingon Empire, or in this context of this game, and how that came to be. There were a bunch of YouTube shorts that I created that were kind of harking to key moments of stuff that was going on in the game. We talked about, for example, though we never really did, sort of highlights about different races or factions in the game. What kind of stuff would be interesting to you? For example, as we're getting close to the new game, would it be of use to you to sort of go through, and granted, I have a scope of expertise, but I'm not the be-all and end-all authority on all things in this game. So would it be of use to you for me to be able to go through some of these different factions? Like, for example, understanding, I could talk about the Klingons, the Romulans, the Paravians, the Federation. These are all factions that I've played, so I can speak to those particular factions, what I've learned, what kind of capabilities that I've seen, perks, things that make them unique, for example. And we can talk about that as far as like helping you understand, as the viewer, understand how these different sort of playable races or factions in the game might be different. We could also talk about, and we've talked about this before, having interviews or like one-on-ones with some of the players that are coming into the game to be able to talk about their experience and understand what it's like for them to join this game, what sort of things that they liked or disliked, or sort of the dynamics, the fun of it all, like why do they play this? Understanding the sort of the motivations and mentality behind folks that might play this game. And that might help you as an audience member who's not actually engaged in this game, but just like to watch. And maybe you are thinking, maybe I would like to play this, but it seems too complicated, or there's too much involved, or for whatever reason, there's a reason why you don't want to do it. Maybe hearing those interviews or those discussions, those one-on-ones, would help illustrate or, make you feel more comfortable about what's going on in this context. Like, how would it be useful for you to, would you feel up to playing it perhaps after hearing a story where you realize it's not as tough as you might have thought it would be, it's not as complicated as you thought it would be, and the biggest and the most complicated piece about this is making sure that you have the right Vassal module loaded on Vassal, which is not that hard, and then making sure that you're able to search a PDF document for rules and navigate basic Excel spreadsheets. That's pretty much it. Can you navigate an Excel spreadsheet in basic terms? Click, type stuff in, and you can like run a very basic balance sheet. If you can do that, it's easy. Can you do a Control F function search for things in the rules on a PDF document? Because it's super easy to find. If you can do that, good. And can you run Vassal on a Windows-based machine that you have? If you can do that, run Excel and run a Control F function on an Adobe Reader, Adobe Acrobat Reader, then you're good to go. You can play this game, and it's just fun from there. So yeah, with that said, let me go in. Oh, Jim's got a whole bunch here. So Jim says a bit more depth. Hold on, bit more in-depth look at the newbies. More newbies are coming. Absolutely. Belly dancing green Orions. Huh. Well, I don't know that I could get any belly dancing green Orions or people who would be willing to get dressed up as green Orions to do belly dancing for this particular channel. But I like where your head's at. Out of the box thinking, Jim. I like it. What about enemies you have faced? Excuse me. Enemies you have faced with which races, like now, with the Klingons versus the. Sorry. Let me. what about enemies you have faced with which races like now? Okay, so like as a player, who was I playing? Who was I fighting? And what did that look like? Got it. All right. Got it. Who did you fight with the feds? That sort of thing. Shame. Okay, got it. All right. So we can certainly do videos about that, or I can get on. I can do little relatively short pre-recorded videos and publish about that. I can talk about that. We'll call it like fireside chats or something like that. Like, yeah, fireside chats, and I have like a little thing of like bourbon or whiskey, and I'll just kind of sit there and I'll share my stories about the traumatic experience of fighting the Kzinti and how they bombarded me with their never ceasing, ever replenishing drones, or how I was able to stomp out the hydrants and quell the flood of fighters flowing towards me, or how the Remans, which is an interesting faction in this game in the sense of they are an alternative version of the Romulans using the K hulls or the Klingon hulls from the game, and how they stabbed me in the back and in very sort of classic Romulan fashion, how they stabbed me in the back and ganged up on me in a very interesting way. Or how I left the back door open in my very first game and got stomped when I had started off so strong. All sorts of interesting stories I can tell, and sort of lessons learned that you can have from my experience. Happy to do that. Make sure you get the schmaltzy music ready. Okay, well I'll have to do some searching for some music in the background that is appropriate for telling these kinds of stories. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And yeah, you just tell me what works for you as far as the things that you're interested in sort of listening in on this campaign. What do you want to hear about, and so on and so forth. However, we are now coming up on the hour, so I just want to make sure that you guys are getting great value out of this. Thank you again for sort of this sudden surge in subscribers on the channel. Really appreciate that for all of you who are watching, subscribing, and following along with the channel. If you've stayed this long, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Again, if you haven't already subscribed, please consider hitting that subscribe button. Give us a little thumbs up on that like. It helps, again, with the algorithm. All about trying to get this message out to as many Star Trek fans, wargaming fans, people who would enjoy, playing this game and sort of having this sort of fun with us. It's all about sort of tickling the YouTube algorithm and making sure that it likes us and perpetuates or advertises what we're doing forward, all for the benefit of building this player base to be able to have fun playing this game and really just have a good time. So with that said, thank you so much for joining us today, or joining me today. It's been a pleasure. Looking forward to sort of the various diplomatic emails that will be coming and firing forth. The Kzinti and the ISC and the Klingons will be having, I'm sure, an interesting diplomatic tussle back and forth, trying to figure out how we're going to play nice with each other. I'm really looking forward to seeing, as per the thumbnail from yesterday's video, lions and tigers and squids, oh my. So we got the tigers, but where are the lions and the squids? Like, I know they're out there, where they just haven't been revealed yet. So I'm looking forward to that. Hopefully that'll be coming in either 103, maybe 104. I mean, any turn now, they're gonna show up on the map. So hopefully we can do that sooner rather than later. And of course, I'll be sharing all these sort of diplomatic, fun-loving, role-playing-esque things that are happening in the background as they happen with you on this channel. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, make sure you follow us along and keep your finger on the pulse of how this exciting game is going. Again, sort of like looking forward, as we get closer to Christmas, the total war scenario is imminent. Like, at some point, the gloves are off and we're all going to town, because there's nothing to lose. We are going to be starting a new campaign in January. So at some point, this is all going to go down, like rumble in the jungle, baby. And so it'll be interesting to see how that all pans out. Yeah, I'm really excited for it. So thank you so much for joining us today, or joining me today, and looking forward to seeing you in next week. And I think we're going to stick with this 11 o'clock timing, because the 11 o'clock timing works better sort of in the real life scenario. Also for our folks across the pond, earlier in the morning works better for them as opposed to in the afternoon. And of course, if there are other timings that might work well for you, then and please, send me a little note and let me know how that works. But generally speaking, I think these live streams will continue on this kind of tempo and pace of 11 o'clock Pacific time on Saturday, with maybe a bonus episode every Sunday or so when the turns are a little late or delayed. So, yeah, good stuff. Thank you so much for joining us. Really looking forward to next episode, and I will see you next week.